Welcome back to Talking 10 TV. It's Andy Coppens, publisher of Talking 10, and of course, the managing editor over at Talking Badgers. And the other person you're seeing in this video is Talking Northwestern's own Philip Rosmann-Reich, coming at you for all of the previewing, predicting, and prognosticating of the Badgers and Wildcats Big Ten opener in Madison on Saturday. And Phil, gotta hand it to you because you were the one who came up with the great previewing, predicting, and prognosticating line. Normally, you only see one of us previewing things for either at Talking NU or at Talking Badgers, but we're combining forces for these two teams meeting at Camp Randall. It's probably only obvious that we don't do separate previews for this. So I got to ask you, what's been going on, and are you ready for some Big Ten football once again?
Saturday was so weird not having to stress about Northwestern. Like around about noon Eastern time, I got this sense of dread, and then I was like, wait a second, Northwestern can't lose today. But I think that dread was the trip to Camp Randall coming up. This is obviously a humongous game for both teams for the Big Ten West, and I'm excited to see how this one plays out.
All right, well, let's get right into the previewing, predicting, and prognosticating you all know and love here on Talking 10 TV. And that means we're starting with one burning question. And since the Wildcats are visitors, our squared won the toss by calling heads, so he'll go first here with the burning questions.
My one big burning question for Northwestern entering this game is the offensive line ready for Big Ten play? Northwestern's offensive line has been a huge question mark the entire season, and the non-conference schedule, Nevada, Duke, Bowling Green, did very little to ease those concerns. The Wildcats offense looks okay. They averaged 160.3 rushing yards per game, but they still gave up 7 sacks in 3 games. And against Duke, the best team Northwestern has played to this point, the offense gained just 191 yards of total offense and gave up 4 sacks. And that was Duke. Duke is not a bad team, but Duke is not Wisconsin. In that game, Clayton Thorson did not have a lot of time to throw, and Justin Jackson was a virtual non-factor. The Wildcats simply could not move the ball, could not give their quarterback time to throw, get his feet set, find his receivers, and the team cracked in a 41-17 loss. That was much worse than that scoreline indicates. It's not likely that Northwestern's going to play that poorly again. I think they definitely learned a lesson. But miscommunication along the offensive line and their struggles to give Thorson time in the pocket and even just getting Justin Jackson some interior runs and getting him down the field were chronic problems throughout non-conference season. So the big question for Northwestern is, can this offensive line come together, protect their quarterback, get their star running back some running lanes, and give the offense some time on the field to move the ball down and make some big plays? That is a huge question, and Wisconsin is clearly Northwestern's biggest challenge to date. The whole offensive game plan for the Wildcats and their chances to stay in this game, to me, hinge on whether that offensive line can get the job done.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting when you've got two teams that are coming fresh off of a bye week and then two teams who have only played their 3 non-conference games. You really kind of have to measure what those games really meant. And for me, I'm going with the same kind of theme about the non-conference schedule, but for me, the Badgers' biggest question is, has the stat sheet lied for the Wisconsin Badgers? Wisconsin is one of the most well-rounded teams in the Big Ten according to the stat sheet. It has the best scoring offense, one of the best running backs in the league, one of the most efficient quarterbacks, and one of the best defenses in almost every stat category possible. And it's all added up to mean a 141-30 advantage on the score sheet through 3 non-conference games. Now, however, for me, those games were against a mediocre, and I'm being kind by saying mediocre, Utah State team, a bad Florida Atlantic team, and a struggling BYU program. Now, for me, this is Wisconsin's first Power 5 opponent of the season. So let's see if they can live up to the hype that the numbers have created, or if they're going to wilt under the pressure of Big Ten play, because they have not really been challenged outside of giving up those, I think it was, 10 points and a 10-0 hole to Utah State. But then they blew the doors off of Utah State with, I think it was 50 or 49 unanswered points or whatever it was in that contest. But for me, it's all about, can they live up to the hype of those numbers and do it against a Big Ten opponent. So it's going to be interesting. And let's move forward to two key stats here. And of course, with Philip winning the toss, he gets to deliver, well, it's not really going to be two key stats. It's going to be one per team here. But Philip, you're up first.
My first key stat, talked about the offensive line and my big question. My key stat talks about the defensive line, and that number is 4. Northwestern has just 4 sacks through 3 games this season against, again, Nevada, Duke, and Bowling Green. Not exactly murderer's row, although Duke is looking to be a much better team than everyone anticipated. Bowling Green is probably going to be one of the worst teams in the conference, and Nevada, or in the country. Nevada is probably better than people think, but not exactly a world beater either. There's just not a lot of pressure to report coming from the Wildcats' revamped front 7. With the secondary dealing with significant injury issues, Northwestern's inability to get into the backfield and get pressure on the quarterback has been a huge issue for this defense. Simply, they weren't able to get pressure. Quarterbacks had time to throw, and eventually receivers are going to get open. At least they will in the Big Ten play. Some of this might be because Northwestern is kind of keeping its pressure and blitz packages secret. Northwestern is kind of known to do this. Go out into the non-conference schedule and run, unless they're playing like a Stanford or some ranked team, run a very vanilla set. They'll go one-on-one, let the defensive line try and create all their pressure, and that's not going to work. The Wildcats simply did not blitz a lot during the non-conference season. So they very well could unleash themselves a little bit more coming off the bye week and heading into Big Ten play. They knew that they had this row of Wisconsin and then Penn State next week to get ready for, so they didn't want to reveal too much, I guess, especially against those 2 big offensive lines. But in all likelihood, Northwestern is going to have to try and remain keeping the ball in front of them, making solid, quick tackles, and playing and forcing Wisconsin to dink and dunk them. Limit the run game, limit the pass game. They're not going to get a lot of pressure on the quarterback. But eventually, in this game, they're going to need to make a play. They're going to need to force a turnover and get to the quarterback and make Wisconsin feel the pressure a little bit. If Northwestern can't get pressure, they're not going to win this game.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, R-squared, and something definitely to watch, especially with another week of shuffling for Wisconsin's offensive line. And we just don't know going into this game exactly who that starter is going to be, I believe, at left guard. We know that John Dietzen is likely out, but there's rumors that Micah Kapoy might not be the starter there either. So with some of those things changing, interestingly enough, Wisconsin's offensive line has given up just 4 sacks on the season through 3 games. And for me, though, it's really funny that you mentioned Alex Hornibrook, because my stat is 70, and that's Alex Hornibrook's completion percentage in non-conference play. And this one kind of plays off my burning question, because Hornibrook has had one magical game against BYU 2 weekends ago. He completed a crazy 18-19 passes in a blowout victory and was as efficient as humanly possible in that game. But the week before was a nightmare scenario for him. So my question is, which version shows up against a pretty good Wildcats pass defense, even though you mentioned the secondary being going through some of their own injuries? And still, they've only allowed opponents to complete 57.1% of their passes. So something is going to have to give there. Now, if Hornibrook is allowed to complete over 65% of his passes in this game, that is great news for the Badgers and horrific news for Northwestern. And it likely, for me, means the Badgers' run game is running wild and the pass game is opening up because of it. And when that happens, it's really not good news for opposing teams.
Yeah, and I think while Northwestern still has some very talented cornerbacks, and it does appear like they're getting a little bit healthier, there's obviously just a huge drop-off for the Wildcats with some of the injuries that they have. It looks like the injury report hasn't come out yet. It'll be out by the time this publishes probably, but it looks like Trey Williams and Montre Hardage will be back after the bye week. I think Trey Williams had missed some time. They'd slid Kyle Cairo over, but the Wildcats are really hurting in their secondary. So there is an opportunity there to take advantage of the secondary, especially if, again, like I pointed out, Northwestern can't get pressure on the quarterback. If in all 3 of the games before Northwestern gave opposing quarterbacks a lot of time to throw. And if there's one thing we know about Wisconsin quarterbacks, they tend to be game managers, and that's used as a compliment here, because they make safe, good throws against defenses that they take what the defense gives them, essentially. Northwestern's going to give something up in the secondary, I think, this week, especially if they're struggling to get to the quarterback, and if they're going to kind of pin their ears back and try and just stop the run, make sure that they control the ground game and force Hornibrook to beat him over the top. Maybe that's what the strategy is eventually, and the Wildcats just try and hold the line a little bit on the run game.
And that means we're moving forward, though, folks, onto our three key players. We've talked about some of the names of this game, but actually, I don't think we've mentioned any of the names we're going to mention here in our three key players. Philip, okay, it's not really three key players. It's more like four, because we kind of have to equal things out here. But who's your first player to watch in this game?
My first player to watch in this game is Garrett Dickerson, Northwestern's super back. That's tight end to the rest of the world. Wisconsin gets rightly all the talk about tight ends. Troy Fumagalli is probably the best tight end in the Big Ten, at least. Mm-hmm. But Northwestern has had a nice run of super backs / tight ends too. And Garrett Dickerson is the next guy in line, and he has been really solid for the Wildcats so far this year. He has a team high 14 receptions and is second on the team with 188 yards. Dickerson is Clayton Thorson's security blanket. He's often the dump down option, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Wildcats target Dickerson underneath for quick passes to get yards and get the offense moving, especially if they're struggling on the offensive line. Not to mention, Dickerson should be valuable as an extra blocker should the Wildcats need it there as well. So I would definitely keep an eye on Garrett Dickerson for the Wildcats on offense.
It's a name that Badger fans who follow recruiting should be well aware of, because that was a massive battle between Wisconsin and Northwestern for Dickerson's commitment. But moving forward, I'm going to stick on the offensive side of the ball here. I'm going with Jonathan Taylor. It's a name obviously we've mentioned before. But my question is, who leads the Big Ten in rushing yards per game? Hint, it isn't any of the big names coming into the season, nor is it highly touted freshman J.K. Dobbins at Ohio State. It's Wisconsin's own freshman sensation, Jonathan Taylor. And he started the last two games, partly due to injury, but also because he flashed potential in the opener. I mean, he was, I think, 1 yard away from topping Bradrick Shaw for the rushing lead in that opener against Utah State. And then he ripped off the fourth best single game in UW freshman history in his first start in week 2 against Florida Atlantic, going for over 200 yards on the ground. He's got 5 rushing touchdowns, which also lead the Big Ten. I mean, for me, it is when you think of Wisconsin, you think quality running backs first. And the question going into the season was, okay, is Bradrick Shaw that quality, that star power running back? He still might be. We really don't know. But we do know that Jonathan Taylor can be that. He's obviously going to get a bigger test going against a better defense than he's faced all season long. But at the same point in time, when you're putting up over 200 yards and you're starting to talk about Ron Dane-like numbers, you're doing something right as a freshman, and he's a guy to watch in this game.
Yeah, it seems like you guys grow those running backs on trees. Record-breaking running backs.
It's just the New Jersey Turnpike.
Oh, something's in the water there for sure. Speaking of something in the water, my second player to watch is Tyler Lancaster, Northwestern's defensive tackle. This is a big game, and so the big players need to step up. And there are very few players at least at Northwestern, that are as big as Tyler Lancaster. Lancaster's been solid for the Wildcats up the middle at defensive tackle. He's done a good job stopping the run and plugging the hole in the middle of the line. He's gotten into the backfield a little bit and been one of the big impact players on the defensive side of the ball, just like we expected. He will have to do that again, and probably a little bit more this week, to force Wisconsin to the perimeter, where Northwestern can maybe use a little bit of its speed, use the sideline as an extra defender, and kind of limit what Wisconsin does in the run game, as you said. I don't think Lancaster has to total a ton of tackles, but he needs to make his presence felt. He needs to be in that backfield. He needs to be involved in tackles, and he needs to be kind of pushing Wisconsin away from the run game probably and into some of that short passing game that I talked about. I think that's the way that Northwestern's going to be able to stay in this game and have a chance to win it, is if their big guy in the middle makes his presence felt and kind of blows up some of the protection that Wisconsin has and some of the run blocking that Wisconsin has in the middle of the field.
That's a fair point. And for my second player, we're sticking defense. I think we're kind of getting a theme here going. But mine is Garrett Dooley, Wisconsin's outside linebacker. Simply put, Wisconsin hasn't gotten to the quarterback a ton. I mean, yeah, they've got 8 sacks, but at least in week 3 against BYU, they were able to show that they could consistently get after the quarterback. The Cougars were starting a quarterback for the first time in his career in Bo Hodge. They also had their own offensive line issues. But if Wisconsin wants to keep progressing defensively, ramping up the pressure from 2 new starting outside linebackers going into 2017, of which Dooley is one, it would be a great place to start Big Ten play. And Dooley comes in with just 1 sack, but no player on Wisconsin's roster has more than 2 of the 8 already piled up this season. So for me, you also have to look at the other intangibles. He's got 8 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss. There's just a ton of potential here from Garrett Dooley. He's a veteran player for them, and it's very interesting to see how things have dynamically changed. Like, it just seems like there's a lot more wealth spread out with the new defensive coordinator and Jim Leonhard, but you got to think that you're used to the TJ Watts, the Vince Beagles, you could name 5 or 6 guys in a row here that was plug and play and you get these insane numbers from, and you just haven't seen it yet, even from Leon Jacobs, opposite of Garrett Dooley. I personally think in this game, you've got to have Garrett Dooley be the guy that starts getting pressure on Clayton Thorson and closes those edge rushes for Justin Jackson, because that's where he's really done the damage, interestingly enough, against the Badgers. So Garrett Dooley and his play at outside linebacker is going to be key for me. And that means we're moving on to prediction time. And of course, Phil, you may have had the easier part of it here by going first. Not so much in prediction time. What say you for this matchup between your Northwestern Wildcats and my Wisconsin Badgers?
Yeah, before the season, when everything was rainbows and puppy dogs, I might have believed that Northwestern would steal a win from Camp Randall and put themselves in the driver's seat for the Big Ten West title. After watching the first 3 games of the season, it's probably pretty clear that Northwestern's hiding a little bit of something defensively. I'm sure the bye week will give them a chance to add some new wrinkles defensively and throw some different pressure packages at Alex Hornibrook in Wisconsin that they haven't shown at all this season. But ultimately, and so I think their defense will come to play, and I think their defense will put up a very good showing. But ultimately, that offensive line gives me a lot of worries for Northwestern. I think that it'll wear down. The offense will get stagnant. There'll be a mistake somewhere that'll put the defense in a little bit of a hole. And eventually, I just think Northwestern's defense will tire out. We saw that especially against Duke when the offense couldn't do very much. And while I don't anticipate Northwestern playing that poorly offensively, even though Wisconsin's a better team than Duke, I don't think that Northwestern will be able to kind of keep themselves on the field. And eventually, Wisconsin will pull away. I have Wisconsin defeating Northwestern 34-21 to open up Big Ten play with a win.
I think it's interesting because over the past 2 years, I've gotten to know Justin Jackson and some of the other players on Northwestern's team really well through media days and some of the other events here in Chicago. But that being said, it's really interesting that, like, if you would have planted somebody from 20 years ago today and then told them that Northwestern Wisconsin is probably the biggest game on the Big Ten West schedule, they would look at you cross-eyed. And
First, they would say, "What's the Big Ten West?"
Yes, and then they would look at you cross-eyed. But for me, I mean, this is a massive game. It's akin to a rivalry matchup, and there's no doubt that Wisconsin faces easily its toughest opponent of the season so far. But outside of the 2015 debacle in Madison, playing at Camp Randall has been kind of the Badgers' MO of butt kickings of Northwestern in Camp Randall. I expect more of it this time, and I expect to see UW's defense put on a show against Clayton Thorson. I know he can be accurate at times. I know he can be impressive, but that secondary is probably the best one that he's seen, including Duke. And I think that's troublesome when you get that front seven, given some pressure and the different looks. They can go 4-3, 3-4. They can pack a safety in at linebacker and do some really crazy things because of their personnel groupings. But my worry is in attacking the pass game that Justin Jackson gets loose a few times, because we've seen Wisconsin give up big plays before, and it's happened in this series. But still, UW's defense is stingy enough to hold up and may even get a defensive score in this one. I'm going to make that bold prediction. Offensively, I see the three-headed rushing attack coming back, having a good day, and UW's offensive line, they got the bye week. They're almost back to 100%. I've got Wisconsin winning this one. A little different than you, but I'm going 38-17. Badgers pull out the victory and kind of take the bull by the horn in the Big Ten West Division.
And don't forget, Northwestern on ABC has usually ended in pain for the Wildcats. I think last year's game against Ohio State was the only time that I can remember that Northwestern played a close game on ABC in the last decade.
And to be fair, I mean, this is an 11 a.m. kickoff, so we'll see how sleepy the Badger faithful are. But I have a feeling after 2 weeks of not seeing,
we're used to 11 a.m. kickoffs in Evanston.
Yeah, you are, and Wisconsin fans are definitely too. But it'll be very interesting to see what takes place here. Again, don't forget you can follow all of the Badger side of this at Talking Badgers, Wisconsin.talking10.com. You can follow Philip Rosmann-Reich at RiseNU, at TalkingNU, and Northwestern.talking10.com. Of course, it has been my pleasure to host this preview, and do not forget, enjoy the rest of your week and keep on living the B1G life.